Now, we all remember the excitement and thrill of being the fictional pirate Edward Kenway sinking frigates in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. And since Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag Resynced is upon us, and AC4 is also my favorite video game, I thought it would be interesting to do at least one video on some of the actual pirates in the game, and talk about the real stories of the pirates that you meet in the fictional setting, and the truth to their stories. And I thought who better to start this little pirate documentary series, let me know if y'all want this to be a full-fledged thing, with the first pirate that you meet in the game, the gentleman pirate, Stede Bonnet. Stede Bonnet was born in 1688 to his father Edward and his mother Sarah in Bridgetown, Barbados. Stede's parents were actually relatively well-to-do, with 400 acres of his land being given to Stede in 1694 whenever his father passed away. Which already brings up an interesting aspect of Stede's life, which is the fact of he came from a well-to-do family and he lived with the highest society of Barbados at the time, which, given that this was 1700s pirate culture, a man coming from that background and Breaking Bad like that just didn't really happen from what I've gathered. So it leads to the question of what happened, what caused him to break bad. See, Stede Bonnet was essentially raised by John Whetstone, who was the Deputy Secretary of Barbados, as well as the grandnephew of Oliver Cromwell, which, if y'all don't know who Oliver Cromwell is, look him up, another very important figure. Stede married his wife Mary Albany in 1709, of which they had 3 sons and a daughter. It's also important to mention that not that much is actually known about Stede before his time as a pirate. That's why some of my information on this is relatively limited. What we do know is that he did hold the rank of Major in the Barbados Militia during the War of Succession, aka the Queen Anne's War, but there's no record that he had actually fought in any of the battles. Now, as for why he decided to turn to a life of crime, the answer to that is pretty hard to pin down. And I've got somewhere between 0 and a shitload of reasons as to why I think he did that. For one thing, his marriage with his wife was known to be an unhappy one, with his wife being described as nagging to the point that he was willing to upend his entire life to get away from her. This is also with the culmination of his son Albany passing away in 1715. Stede also took out a loan of £1,700, which in modern times is hundreds of thousands of dollars, which may suggest that he was in some form of money troubles. Though I have my own personal theory on that as well. Now, what I think might have been one of the biggest, if not the biggest contributors to Stede turning to the life he did was he was turning 30 around the time where he became a pirate, which, if y'all don't know, 30 back then, that was the midlife. And I think a culmination of him reaching that midlife, feeling the need for adventure, and feeling just bored, essentially, culminating with the death of his son, the money troubles, possible money troubles, as well as generally just not having a happy marriage. I think it drove him to do what he did, to a certain extent. This doesn't help with all the times he spent at the pubs hearing the stories of swashbuckling pirates, making money and living the high life on the high seas, I think that benefited it as well. So, with all this coming together in his life, he had finally figured it out. He found the missing piece. Grand Theft Boat. That's what he needed. He needed to go out and he needed to be a swashbuckling pirate and raid the high seas. And that's what he did. Now, you remember how I said earlier that he took a £1,700 loan out around this time? Yeah, my theory is that he wasn't taking out that £1,700 loan because he was entirely in money troubles. I think it was more a case of he was using it to contract a ship full of cannons, supplies, and a crew to sail it. I think that that's more likely. Now, mind you, Bonnet had no clue about sailing life. Like, none at all. He didn't know shit about it. But yet, nonetheless, he still commissioned the building of a sloop, which is big enough where, yes, you can call it a ship, but still somebody can look at it and be like, sailboat. He had equipped the vessel with 10 cannons, which was quite a lot for a ship of such a small size, and enlisted over 70 men for his crew. Another key aspect of the ship, and probably why the shipyard wasn't alarmed by all the guns, was it really wasn't a thing for pirates to commission for their ships to be built. I mean, because they were pirates. They would just steal them, That, or they would mutiny on a ship that they were already on and convert it to a pirate ship. So his pirating career started off with a pretty rocky start, given he commissioned his ship instead of, being a pirate and stealing it. He hired a crew, like he paid the crew wages, which again, that's not what pirates did. They split bounties of the stuff that they looted. And he pretty much had the street cred of Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. Oh, and no sailing experience, that too. So you wouldn't be shocked to know that he wasn't very well respected by his crew, especially for the fact that he heavily relied on his quartermaster and his officers for helping, you know, sailing matters. So, everything. So, once the provisions were aboard and his crew was ready to set sail, Stede had set sail out of Carlisle Bay on his new ship, of which he named the Revenge, and abandoned his whole family. Yeah, he just noped right the fuck out of there, so he had enough. He got the milk and didn't come home. First, Stede sailed near the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, where he captured 4 ships and stole their cargo, with one ship named the Turbs actually being Barbadian, and in order to keep his secret from the island of Barbados, he had the ship sunk. He sunk the sink in order to keep his piracy secret from his home island. He then sailed north to New York and captured a couple ships, but had found that the pillaging in New York was less profitable and wasn't worth the risk. Kind of like playing cook-off with randos in Payday 2. If you know, you know. Bonnet then set sail to South Carolina, where he found the pillaging to be more profitable and actually used the timber from one of the sloops he captured to repair the Revenge, just like you can do in Assassin's Creed 4. Then in August of 1717, Bonnet set sail to the infamous Nassau, which essentially was the Ingalls, Oklahoma of the West Indies. You guys need to watch my video on Bull Dueling if you want to get the reference to that. On his way to Nassau, he encountered and stupidly tried to fight a Spanish man-of-war, which, if you don't know what a man-of-war is, imagine an AC-130, but 1700s edition. That's what it was. It was a fucking gunship. A massive gunship on the water. Naturally, he was wounded, a shitload of his crew died, and his ship was badly damaged in the encounter. When he arrived in Nassau, he very quickly replaced his crew because Nassau was the literal hub of the Pirate Republic at the time. And then he fitted the Revenge with 2 more guns, adding the total number to 12, which for a sloop was very uncommon. That was very indicative of a pirate ship at the time. In case of another sloop v fucking man-of-war situation, which, no, those extra 2 cannons, they would not make a fuck to a man-of-war. Not even close. While in Nassau, Stede being, while a laughable one, a pirate captain nonetheless, quickly garnered the attention of very notable figures such as Ben Hornigold and Ed Teach. Blackbeard. His relationship with Blackbeard was especially intriguing because they surprisingly became true friends, at least from what I gathered. Agreeing to sail together with Blackbeard captaining Stede's ship, while Stede recovered from his wounds. Unsurprisingly, the track record of successful ship plunders of the Revenge went quite a ways up when under the command of Blackbeard, because, you know, Blackbeard actually knew what the fuck he was doing. They captured 11 ships around Delaware Bay alone. But since Stede was still recovering from his wounds, he wasn't really taking part in any of these raids, and there were reports of him walking around the ship in his nightshirt during the plunders. With respect to Stede's legacy, Blackbeard actually captured the French slave ship, the La Concorde, on the Revenge, which, for those who don't know, the La Concorde had its name changed to the Queen Anne's Revenge and was fitted with 40 cannons, and that was Blackbeard's signature battleship. After Blackbeard took the Queen Anne, Stede was made captain of the Revenge again, as Blackbeard didn't have as much use for the Revenge. After the 19th of December, 1717, Blackbeard and Stede separated for a while. Stede and his crew quickly got into some trouble when in March of 1718, they encountered the merchant vessel Protestant Caesar off the coast of Honduras. The ship and its large sum of loot escaped the Revenge, which quickly angered Stede's crew. Which naturally, and rightfully so, they placed the blame of missing out on the loot on Stede Bonnet, and they felt that if they were going to do something so dangerous, they better get after reward for it, so they they mutinied. When they got back in contact with Blackbeard at Turniff Atoll, they quickly deserted him and joined Blackbeard, calling Bonnet on board his own ship. Blackbeard essentially imprisoned him, suggesting that as a gentleman, he would prefer a life of leisure than to the command of a pirate vessel. Blackbeard temporarily put a man by the name of Richards in command of the Revenge. Bonnet, surprised that his colleague had betrayed him, I'm not, found himself as a guest and really a hostage on his own ship. And this is whenever Bonnet admitted to his fellow crew members that if he could exile himself to Spain or Portugal, he would end his pirate life. Guess that midlife crisis finally ended. Of course, in the late spring of 1718, Bonnet had found himself involuntarily involved in the blockade of Charlestown with 4 of Blackbeard's other ships. Because, you know, he was a hostage. Needing a place to refit his vessels, Blackbeard sailed to Topsail Island, where the Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground and was destroyed in June. With dissent rising amongst the pirates, Blackbeard allowed Bonnet to take command of the Revenge again. Around this time, both Stede and Blackbeard went to Bath, North Carolina to accept pardons under King George's Act of Grace. Which, if you don't know what the Act of Grace is, I find it best for this video that I break it down. For those who don't know, King George's Act of Grace was to pirates what RICO was to the Mafia. Like, it was an act that pretty much upended the pirates of the Caribbean and was the beginning of the end of the golden age of piracy. Essentially what the act was a get-out-of-jail-free card, as long as you quit being a pirate. It was swearing allegiance to the crown and swearing to return to a normal life, and the kicker was the people that took the pardon got to keep most, if not all, of their money. You know, there wasn't really a loss in it, you know. Now, you may wonder, why would the crown authorize an act that essentially told the pirates, okay, you won? Well, simple, they kind of fucking did. The British government realized that it would be logistically impossible to just round all these people up and hope that no one would place them, even though there was gold in the water. You know, so they had to find some kind of legislation that would be savory enough to make these guys quit wanting to do it. And they did just that. And the ones that didn't take it out, like hence Charles Vane, who we see referenced in Assassin's Creed as well, you saw what happened to him. But this isn't the end of Stede or Blackbeard's story, of course. No, far from it. While Blackbeard went back to Topsail Island, Stede stayed behind to try to obtain clearance and letter of marque, aka a contract to be a privateer and sink Spanish ships, of which he was granted this clearance. When returning to Topsail Island to retrieve his ship, he found that Blackbeard had sunk 2 of his own ships and severely damaged the Revenge and sailed off with all the loot of the ships that were on board. Feeling that that was one treachery too far on Blackbeard's part, Stede decided to rearm and refit the Revenge and take revenge on Blackbeard. After getting some information as to Blackbeard's whereabouts, Stede went after him, but had missed him by several hours. Hoping to keep his pardon intact, Stede went by an alias of Captain Thomas in order to not allow the Royal Navy to connect the dots and realize he had gone back to pirating. This little tactic was actually done by Blackbeard too, and was the main loophole of the King's pardon. Bonnet also, in one of his more intelligent moments, changed his ship name to the Royal James, which may have been a slight against King George at the time. If you know, you know. I'll let somebody in the comments fill y'all in on that one if you're curious. Stede took the charade one step further by claiming that the next 2 ships he had robbed were actually ships that he had just engaged in trade with. Essentially, he committed money laundering and fraud, 1700s edition. But then, and I think it's mostly because of his crew, Bonnet gave up the charade and just went back to full-on, "Yarr, matey," full-on plundering rather than being a smart criminal. That's another key aspect you'll notice as I cover these stories about pirates. They weren't the sharpest tools in in the shed. During this time, Bonnet garnered probably the most success he had ever sought as a pirate, pillaging 11 ships since his pardon, and even taking 2 sloops to be a part of his squadron. These acts of leadership and brazenness had probably shifted the opinions of him by his fellow pirates from just a pirate tourist to essentially them seeing him as one of their own.
Well. How the turntables...
In need of repairs, Bonnet sailed the Revenge to Cape Fear River in South Carolina, which was a known meetup point for pirates. While there, news had reached Charlestown that a pirate ship had been moored in the Cape Fear River, and the governor of South Carolina authorized the military to go and intervene with the pirates with their warships. On the 26th of September, 1718, 2 8-gun sloops, the Henry and the Sea Nymph, entered the mouth of the river with their 130 militiamen. In an act of courage, and probably something that Stede wouldn't have done the year prior, he had actually sent a letter to the governor saying that he would burn Charlestown to the ground. And the following morning, he and his crew of 45 men set sail toward the rival sloops to engage in the infamous Battle of Cape Fear River. Quickly, all 3 sloops ended up running aground in the battle that lasted 4 to 5 hours, with Bonnet's crew reportedly being quite cheery during the whole battle, receiving less casualties than the rival ships, and even coaxing the military men to come aboard the Revenge in order to fight them hand to hand. The battle was ultimately decided when the rising tide lifted the sloops free, while temporarily leaving the Royal James stranded. As the Henry got closer to the Revenge, they asked Bonnet to surrender, of which Bonnet said that he would rather blow the ship up and he would kill anyone that tried to surrender, with even his own crew demanding that he surrender, and that was his response. And again, this is definitely something I don't think he would have been so ballsy as to do a year prior. This was whenever he really became his own man. But eventually, Bonnet's crew convinced him to raise the white flag, and he did surrender. Bonnet had now been captured and had been sailed to Charlestown in chains on October 3rd. While awaiting trial, Bonnet and his sailing master Harriet escaped on October 23rd. They both hid out in Sullivan's Island with an escaped slave and a Native American. But after a detailed search, a posse of men eventually found Bonnet and his friends and opened fire, killing Harriet and wounding the other men. With Bonnet being returned to prison in a more secure location. While in jail, an alleged civil uprising had occurred for the gentleman pirate, demanding he be released from jail with threats from the Charlestown people that they would burn the town and overthrow the government if he wasn't released. Now, why this had occurred, I couldn't find, but I assume it was because Stede was still seen as a likable, gentlemanly figure, and they probably took pity on him, seeing him as a broken man, but that's just my guess. Either that or they were afraid his friend Blackbeard would show back up and destroy the town. That's always a possibility. After the trial, the judge ruled that Stede be hanged, with proof of him pillaging 2 merchant ships. Part of the proof being his shipmate Pell turning State's evidence, or excuse me, in this case, King's evidence, against him. Along with the townspeople, Governor Johnson himself had felt pity for him after receiving multiple letters from Bonnet expressing he would change his ways, leading to the governor allegedly moving his execution date back 7 times. But on the 10th of December, 1718, the gallows had finally called old Stede in, and he was hanged. Now, in terms of Bonnet's legacy, I think that kind of speaks for itself, with his almost entire story, and very realistically so, being portrayed in Assassin's Creed 4. And also his story being turned into the hit comedy TV show Our Flag Means Death, starring Rhys Darby as Bonnet and Taika Waititi as Blackbeard. I need to see that show, it looks pretty good. See, and I think another important aspect of Stede Bonnet's legacy is he was a man who did exactly what he wanted to do. He saw the call of the wild, the call of the waves, the call of adventure, and didn't just... And he could have just sat there and enjoyed his life, but he just didn't have it in him. He felt the need for adventure, you know? I don't agree with what he did, hell no, you know, he was a pillaging criminal, you know, but at least he did what he felt was his dream to do in life. And all that I gotta leave y'all with is just a simple question, really, before I end this. Am I sugar?